Well, hey, everybody. On the Road with Beards and Dunn is back for another episode. And we're considering our author series. We've had a series of authors. We had Brad Fowley with his book, The Front Runner. We had Mark Polina with his Boston Marathon Handbook. We had Lori Sheldon with the Change of Heart with her husband's heart transplant. That
Rich Benyo,
my former teammate. And Rich Benyo. We've had Rich Benyo, another author. And we saved the best author for last, at least in my opinion. We have Joe Henderson. And now I'm going to do a little introduction, and then I'll let, because Dick, I know will do a great one, is, I was talking to Dick the other day about, the running boom, because we were both kind of the young bucks, high school age, when that thing took off and running became acceptable. The first time I went running in 1971, my parents were a little put out that I was going to run down the side of the road in gym shorts and a t-shirt, because I think their mind was the neighbors are going to think I'm nuts because nobody did that. And they accepted it. And it just, I got to love my parents because they didn't say, don't do it. You're going to embarrass us. But I kind of felt they thought, and they said, do what you got to do. And anyway, so I was sucking up any information I could get about running because I wanted to learn more about running. And so, we were talking about the running boom, and Frank Shorter, the 1972 Olympics, winning the gold medal, really put it on the map. Running was, Ken Cooper and his book Aerobics. Runner's World magazine kind of sprung up, Bob Anderson. And Joe Henderson was the first full-time employee, if I'm not mistaken, of Runner's World magazine. Now, kind of get your head wrapped around that. Bob Anderson was publishing this thing out of Kansas, if I remember correctly. Basically, a basement shop type of situation. I don't know. But it was growing. He saw, he had a vision, but it outgrew him. And he thought, I need somebody here that can help me develop this. And he brought in a guy named Joe Henderson. And, I could go through Joe's accomplishments. He's a heck of a runner, state champion of Iowa, both the 800 and the mile, Joe, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, yes, but
okay.
7 times the state champion.
7?
7
wow.
times.
Okay. Oh, man. So Joe, termed, and I'm going to, he's a prolific writer. I think around 30, I think I went to Wikipedia and counted about 30 books that you've been either co-authored or authored yourself. And you've kind of been given I think you coined the phrase LSD, long, slow distance, which is, we're going to talk about that. They remarketed that, by the way, Joe. They call it Zone 2 now. And Zone 2 is very popular. And they took your concept of long, slow distance and remarketed it, retitled it. And they call it Zone 2. Zone 2 is what 80% of your runs, your rides, your efforts. It's that sub-threshold. It's that comfortable conversational pace. It's not, walk, jog pace. It's probably a little more than that. It's just you're breathing deep. And, Joe, I think you get credited for it. And then sometimes people even took it the wrong way and said long, slow. I think the word slow bothered people or something because they wanted to be fast. And so we'll get into that in a little bit. But, if you don't know who Joe Henderson is, you're missing the boat. I know I went on, I Googled you, and, you can still find your publications, your books. I found Joe Henderson quotes, which I printed out, which I think are just golden. And hopefully we'll have some time to get to that. But people really owe it to themselves to check you out, Joe. And I just appreciate this opportunity. Last story, because nobody wants to hear me talk, even though I do all the time, is I went to Palo Alto, California in 1976 with my best friend, Al Strottmeyer, to spend Christmas vacation at my grandmother's. We wanted to get out of South Dakota, get to some warm weather. And I knew Runner's World magazine was in the Bay Area down there. And I got in a car. My uncle lent me a car. And Al Strottmeyer and I drove to the headquarters and walked in.
I haven't even heard this one.
2 farm kids, talk about hicks off the cabbage wagon, and we walked in and go, hi, we're here. We'd like to take a tour of the place. And the secretary goes, okay. And she called Joe up, and Joe, could you come up here? There's some kids from South Dakota.
Come on.
No, I'm not making this up. And Joe I don't think he remembers this, but he came up front. I introduced myself and I said, well, Jay Dirksen is my coach at South Dakota State. And I think you recognize Jay's name because Jay was a 221 marathoner back in the 60s and South Dakota State University and all that. And just because you're from Iowa, you're so nice. You're very cordial. You gave us a tour of Runners World headquarters. We got to look in the back rooms where there were writers. I remember they were working on the top 10 lists for the marathons for all the different age groups. It was amazing. And then I said, hey, can we, because you guys advertise, can we buy anything while we're here? And he go, well, I'm going to give you the address of the warehouse. We drove to this warehouse. I bought an Adidas rain suit, paid with, I think I had traveler's checks because my folks wouldn't give me cash for fear I'd lose it or something. But Joe, I know, but that was Joe Henderson. He was not too big for his britches to entertain a couple of young teenagers from the Midwest, because we had gone all the way out of our way to come visit Runner's World, and Joe was there. And so, Joe, this is a great honor. I've gotten to know you with the Dick Beardsley running marathon camps that we did over the years, and it's always been a treat. We always got campers assigned to us, and all the campers wanted Joe to be their coach. Dick and I people would get assigned to Dick and I, and they go, great.
We get the leftovers.
Yeah, it's kind of like the lottery. The losers had to have me or Dick as their coaches. But anyway, Joe, I just had to give some of those stories, and we're going to give Dick a chance here to introduce you.
Well, and I've known Joe for 40 plus years, and one of the nicest, most humble people you'll ever meet in the world. He'd give you the shirt off of his back. And the one thing that sticks out, I remember Joe and I were conversing. It was sometime must have been early 80s, because it was after I ran the Grandma's Marathon in 1981. And I swore I'd never tell this story to anybody, to where I hung my clothes up in the window so I could see myself run by at the 25-mile mark. and then at the time, Joe was there was another magazine called Running, I think. And Joe had a column in there, and he told that story and had an illustration in there, I remember, of my clothes hanging up in the window. So, Joe, it is an honor and a true pleasure to have you on with us today. So thank you for joining us.
Well,
all right.
It's been several years since I saw the two of you together at the Dick Beardsley Marathon Camp. And I feel like I've become somewhat of a slob since, because It's been 5 years since I coached any marathoners, and 10 years since I taught running at the University of Oregon. And so it's nice to show that I'm still alive.
Hey, bring us up to speed, Joe. I know you've had some health issues. Do you mind sharing? I know that's kind of a personal question to ask.
Well, my running ended, and both of you can see this yourself, but my running ended suddenly 5 years ago. At the end of 2019, I had a stroke, but worst of all, 2 months after I had the stroke, my wife passed away.
Yes, Barbara.
Yeah, and I feel bad even now that I wasn't aware of her passing. She died of breast cancer, and that's bad news. But worse news is, for several months afterwards, I wondered why my wife quit coming to see me.
Oh,
yeah. Well, your brain was recovering, I guess, from its injury.
It's recovered almost completely.
Yes,
but running ended suddenly in November of 2019, and it ended with my falling down. I remember falling down, but I don't remember anything afterwards.
Were you running at the time, Joe, when that happened?
I was running, and I fell down running. Yes.
Okay.
When did you?
So did you hit your head, or were you having a stroke? Is that why you fell?
I had a stroke before I fell. Yes.
Okay.
But
how much time from that to when you? I hate to see you became lucid.
Several months. Probably that was November, and it was May before I became lucid again. And
amazing.
I don't want to have people feel sorry for me, because I never felt pain. I don't feel pain now. But I live in a senior center, and I walk every day.
Good.
It doesn't surprise
And
me.
it's been like over 100 days in a row that I've walked.
Good for you,
streaking.
Joe.
Yeah.
Man, you're giving me shivers.
But now you can see the walker.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is part of me now.
Be safe. Oh, be safe,
Yeah.
Joe.
Yeah,
Were you a streaker as a runner ever? Did you ever do a streak?
I did, but I wasn't aware of it until afterwards. I did 1,400 days in a row.
Wow.
Holy, I got to do the math on that one. 1,400
But
days.
it was
4
about
years.
between 4 and 5 years.
Yeah.
Not missing a day. And you didn't, and I know
But
Dick would beat us up if I
missing a
don't.
day, but it was silly.
Yeah,
Yeah,
because there are
'cause I
days you
ran
probably.
less and less.
You didn't
Because
run
I was
for.
trying to keep the streak alive.
Sure.
I heard Ron Hill. I don't know if Ron Hill still has the record. The late Ron Hill, great marathoner,
Yeah.
210, 209. He, I think, was running to keep his streak alive. I think he got a stress fracture once and ran with a cast, a mile. When you
He
kind
had
of
a
go,
car
please.
wreck once, and he ran afterwards.
Yeah, he
'cause
broke
that's-
his sternum. I
Oh
heard
my
I heard he was running. He snuck out of the hospital with the IV
at 11 at night.
thing, the IV thing hanging down on that rack, pushed it a mile to get his
Wow.
run in.
That's a typical runner. And you didn't count miles, Joe, or you did maybe back in the day. But tell us about, you kind of converted over. And I
Yeah.
think you probably won some other people over to counting minutes rather than miles.
Well, the minutes are going to be fast no matter what. It doesn't matter if I cover a half a mile in 30 minutes. It still counts.
Right.
And that I quick to add that my walking now is 30 minutes, and it's a half a mile. I say 30 minutes. Yeah.
But you're out there doing it, Joe, and that's the main thing for you or
Well,
anybody.
I'm doing it, and I gave up the coaching of marathoners.
Yeah.
And partly is for a silly reason, but partly it's understandable to runners like you.
Sure.
Is I wasn't running anymore, and so I felt I was playing games with the runners. I was telling them what to do, but I wasn't doing it myself.
I think you need to reconsider, because your knowledge and experience overwhelms a lot of that, Joe.
I know.
I mean, if I was
Right.
running right now and I needed somebody to give me some advice or to help me out, I'd be seeking you out. And I'm sure you would, but you're saying as a full-time, as a regular coach. But I think you still have a lot to offer. But I'm not going to lay a guilt trip on you. Well, I just did. I just did. But I love the concept of
nothing that I haven't
time.
done myself.
Well, I think you got to. You're too humble. And I love the concept of time. And I'm going to share with you, my wife and I, now that we live in the mountains, we basically go by time. How far are we going to ride? 2 hours. How far are we going to ride? Let's go for a long ride. Let's go 3 hours today.
Right.
Because as on bikes you can go so much further and longer without the fatigue setting you. And in the mountains you coast half the time because you're descending after climbing. And so and we actually count feet, elevation gain. We always get at least 2,000 feet. A big ride's over 4,000. And when you get about 5,000-6,000 feet in a ride, that's like a 20 miler, and that's a big ride. But anyway, and so I kind of thought of you when I'm doing this, not counting the miles. A lot of people say, well, how far do you ride your bike these days? Not as far as I used to, but I ride like 2,000 to 3,000 feet per day, which takes 2 hours. And so, in the health industry, they push time. They don't say try to do an aerobic activity like a mile a day. They say 30 minutes, 30 minutes of anything. Get on a bike, an elliptical, a rower, a swimming pool, and you can do it in chunks, and I don't know about your walk, Joe, if you do all 30 minutes in one chunk or if you kind of break it up sometimes into 2 15-minuters.
It's one chunk, but it's like Dick says, it seems like I'm going backwards. What's the word you use, Dick?
If I ran any slower, I'd be going backwards.
Yeah, right. Yes.
All right. Now, I want to get back to the day. And Joe, I'm not going to put you on the spot, but I am. This podcast, it's going to go out to dozens and dozens of people. So be careful what you say. I'm teasing you. But, I know over the years, you were the first employer of Runner's World. You were with them for like 30 plus years?
Well,
1970?
from the 70s to 2014,
Okay.
with a break in the middle.
All
I
right.
worked for Running Magazine. You mentioned Running Magazine.
Yeah.
Yeah. I worked for them for 3 years.
Okay. But then, and it wasn't, and again, I know, and I don't want to try to open up old wounds, but I know you've mentioned over the years, it wasn't they didn't give you the
Acamabo.
gold watch in the parade.
Right. Yeah.
They
It was more of
should have.
thank you for your service. It's no longer required as of Monday or
Yeah.
something like that. I don't know, which seems brutal.
Anyway,
but it was
the magazine business has fallen on hard times, to say the least.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't imagine.
Runner's
I'd hate
World
to-
is now owned by the Hearst Corporation. I haven't read it since they let me go, but
Nor have I.
Me either. Dick and I said I see it sometimes. I hardly ever see it, but you see it at the grocery store. And a lot of times I'm bored. I'll go read Field and Stream before I'll pick up Runner's World.
Right.
Because it holds no allure to me, and there's nothing in there I really want to look at. But you were kind of at the cusp, getting it, growing it, and I kind of wanted to get into this before I forget. Dr. George Sheehan.
Yes.
When I think of the Mount Rushmore of the running boom, I'm putting you on there, Joe. I'm putting George Sheehan on there. We're going to talk about Jim Fixx. He's kind of an anomaly. He wrote one book, sold 1 million copies. I don't know. That just kind of blows my mind. I don't know how he got away with that. And then you can throw, Frank Shorter on there. As, I'm missing people. Of course, Ken Cooper and people like that. But, Frank got it started with winning the Olympics, brought running to people's front of their brains. Runner's World and I really do credit you for developing that magazine into what.
Right.
I know Track and Field News calls themselves the Bible of the sport, but that's a pretty elitist group of track and field news readers. The Runner's World, you brought it to the masses.
Exactly.
And I don't know what did the circulation ever get to that thing, Joe? Do you know off the top of your head?
About 500,000.
500,000 subscriptions a month? Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And then tell me how George Sheehan, because I love George Sheehan's books. I've heard him speak on a couple occasions. I've told the story. I got to meet him once. He insulted us, but that's okay. But I know you instigated. How did you connect with him? I heard it was through Hal Higdon or something like that.
Well, I met George Sheehan at the '68 Olympics.
Okay.
And he was smuggled into the press credential area without a credential. And George Sheehan seemed like an old guy, and he was about 50 years old. And you're a bit over 50, right?
Just a bit.
I certainly am a long way over 50. I couldn't imagine being 50 years old. And I'm 80, almost 81 now. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So
anyway,
you guys met?
I met George at the '68 Olympics, and he started writing for Runner's World shortly after I did, which was 1970.
So did you?
And he did a medical column, basically. Joe?
Did you ask him? Did you invite him? Did you hire him? How does that work in a magazine?
Well, you got to realize what things were like in the 1970s. There was almost nothing about running.
Yeah, right.
And I asked George if he would write for us, and he said, sure. And that was it.
And he was, a cardiologist. He's highly intelligent. And I love reading his books. He said whenever he wrote something, it was usually facts and figures, and then he'd take it and go run with it in his head and then come back and rewrite it, and he'd bring it to life. And I don't know, you can speak to that, I think, as well as, the experience of going out for a run, walk, moving, how you get, your brain starts interconnecting ideas and thoughts and metaphors and analogies and anecdotes come to mind, and it brings it to the masses to where they find it interesting.
Well, George did his best writing on subjects other than medical. In fact, he said he didn't like the term MD at the end of his name. He said, "We're not born with that that
I'll be darned.
that word."
Yeah, that's interesting.
Medical doctor is. So he preferred that if he wrote on non-medical subjects that we don't call him Dr. George Sheehan.
Now that you say that, I don't see MD after his name very often, if ever.
Yeah.
I never thought of that before. He loved philosophy. I mean, William James and Emerson, Thoreau, those guys, he read them. Effort is the measure of the man. I think that would be his.
Right.
On his, I don't know what's on his tombstone, but I think, well, you wrote a book called "Did I Win?" And it's basically, is it his biography?
It's a biography of George Sheehan. Yes.
Right. Yeah.
Because Joe, you and George became quite close. I mean, very good friends, correct?
Very, very much so. Yes.
Yeah.
And George died at just short of his 75th birthday.
Prostate
and that seemed
cancer.
old at the time, but it doesn't seem so old anymore.
No.
No.
Gosh. Yeah. And it was prostate cancer, I think. Yeah.
Prostate cancer.
Yeah, and it's kind of sad because,
he encouraged me on his deathbed, so to speak, to get tested for prostate cancer. And I got tested, and I did suffer from prostate cancer.
That's right. I kind of remember that now, Joe.
Yeah.
You were treated successfully for it then.
Well, it was about 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's one of those things that, sometimes they say, it's a different kinds of cancer. Some are fast spreading, some are not. Some are, the ones, I think by the time George Sheehan had metastasized, which means it had gone into other organs. And where if you can catch it
by the
early
time
on.
it was discovered in his case, it was too far gone.
Yeah, in his bone marrow, what have you and stuff. And so, yeah, that's, but, him, let's talk about Jim Fixx. Did you ever meet Jim Fixx?
Yes.
What was he like, Joe?
Yeah, do you guys get along?
Yes.
I know you're a nice guy, Joe. Now you can tell us the truth here. But no, he's a runner,
it caused a bit of a problem, a big problem, really.
How so?
That he gave credit to me for Runner's World rather than Bob Anderson.
Well, I don't argue with that.
And Bob didn't have the time of day for him when he was interviewing people. And so I was second in command. So I got the interviews. And my experience with Jim Fixx was, it was a good interview, but he might not sell anything in his book. Ha ha. He sold 1 million copies.
Right.
I don't know Bob Anderson other than, when you gave us the tour, and I think you had to go, or before you came out, Bob's wife, and I can't remember her name at that time. Rita was showing us around, and she knocked on Bob's office door, was going to introduce us to him. And she opened it up. He was on the phone, and he looked at her and gave her a look and gave her the wave, and she closed the door. I mean, there was nonverbal communication, like, do not come in this office right now. And I mean, in that 1 second as a 19-year-old guy, I figured out he had no time of the day for whatever we were there for. And he might've been involved with some important phone call, whatever. But yeah, Jim Fixx, I guess what I'm trying to get to is, I think, I don't know if it was a title, Joe, you're so well written, you write so well and have got so many books. And then, and I don't think you've ever had a twinge, and I'm just going to throw it out there, of jealousy for Jim Fixx. Did you ever say, man, I've written 20 books on running? He wrote, I think 2, because he did a revision of his first one.
You're right.
77 was the original, and then in 82, I think, or 80, he updated it or something like that. But I mean, it's like the runners, like me feeling, should I feel jealousy for Dick's success? No, not at all. I'm happy for him. Of course, there's no money on the line between Dick and I, but I don't know. Do you have any thoughts, or do you want to move on?
Well, I have outlived Jim Fixx by a long way, so I won't say anything bad about him. But I think the success of his book surprised him as much as it surprised everybody else.
I don't know if it was the title of it, if it was the cover, it was his legs,
or the timing of it.
The timing of it was just
right.
Yeah.
Yes.
And he was the butt of a lot of comedians' jokes after he passed, which is kind of, poor sport when picking on. But a runner who fell over dead running at age 52, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
But he had outlived his father by 7. He had a terrible genetic predisposition for heart disease. He had smoked up until age 36, I think, when he took up running. I did some research on this, and then he had gone through 2 divorces after his success. I always thought of I heard this story once, Joe, and maybe you did. I don't know if it's true or not, but after his success of the book, he got royalty checks. I'm sure you've gotten a few of those in your years, and his was a pretty good size one. I think it was at one of the peaks.
The emphasis on few.
Well, he went to the bank to deposit it, and I'm not sure if it was 6-figure. It was an appreciable amount of money. He's going to throw it in a savings account or whatever. And he walked into the bank, filled out a deposit slip, handed it to this young girl, teller, and she looked at that check. She looked up at him. She looked back at the check, and she said, "Are you married?" And he goes, "No." And she goes, "Would you like to be?" She had married. I mean, it was that kind of money. She looked him over and thought, I could live with that. Now, it's probably inappropriate, but he was going through. They said when he passed, his weight was back to 214. He was like, he went from like 230 down to 160 during his prime running years. Success hit. He had a second divorce. He was still, out running, trying to get his health, stay fit. So people try not to think that running is dangerous for your health, because it's statistically you're more likely to pass in your couch, lounge recliner, going down the basement steps, what have you, if you're out of shape, than you are if you're out running or anything like that. All right. Well, what we usually get, Joe, is how, your start in running is, I'm sure Dick and I know it. You were a high school athlete who fell into running, probably like Dick and I did, because we couldn't do anything else. I don't know. What's your story?
Right.
I mean,
well,
running
if you
is that.
Saw me standing up, you would say, "Yeah, he's a runner."
Well, yeah, because we're not tall for basketball. We're not big for football.
5'5", and at my best, I weighed 120 pounds.
All right, and so you found running.
And wasn't going to make it in basketball.
No. How did you find running? Did somebody invite you out, or? And so you said, I don't even. If you're like me, I did it because a buddy of mine said, "Let's run track," and I didn't know what that meant, but I knew there were different distances, and we'll figure that out. And you fell into
Joe,
the longer,
were you pretty successful right away in your cross country and track and whatnot?
No.
Okay.
Do you remember your first
race?
Oh, okay. Do you remember your first mile or 800? What your time was?
I remember the first mile because I dropped out.
Okay.
I dropped out.
How about the first
one lap?
Well, a lot of people wish they would have dropped out after one lap.
Yeah.
You were smart
Joe,
enough to,
do you remember why you dropped out? Had you not really trained for it, or what?
I started too fast.
Oh, sure.
Nobody ever does that.
The people at the start who said the way to run the mile is to stay with the leaders.
And then as they get tired, you just keep going.
And I heard 68, 67, 68, 69. And I said, that's as fast as I've run a 440.
So you just had a PR in the first lap.
Right.
Yeah. Yes.
But then
after that,
then you must have figured it out, though.
Meet as a freshman.
You
Wow.
made.
So
Okay.
in the half mile,
Do you remember your time for the half that year?
2:11.
Okay,
Dang.
not bad
Yeah,
for a freshman.
yeah.
How about then? Let's go through
And
sophomore, junior, senior.
I, I'm quick to admit that I ran in Iowa
Well,
and ran in the smallest class of competition, Class C.
That's okay, Joe.
yeah, you
Yeah,
whoever
You
shows
got to
up.
a state meet. That's more than I ever got to.
yeah. But as a senior, I ran 150 to 8 and
Wow.
won the half mile and mile.
And
And I tell you,
422.
breaking 2 minutes
Yeah,
back then,
yeah.
that was a big deal for
I
the
never did
half.
it. Yeah,
Yeah.
our
And I
school
ran
record.
4:22 in the mile.
Yep. Yep.
And I'm quick to admit that this past year, 4 people, one of whom was from Iowa, ran under 4 minutes.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, what do you think of the shoes, Joe? I wasn't going to go. Dick and I bring this
I
up
was going to go there.
with Frank and with Ron Tab. We've had some
The
fun people
shoes
to
and
talk
the
to.
tracks.
Yeah.
Oh, the tracks alone. Jim Ryan ran his 351 on a cinder that had been chewed up.
Yeah.
A second a lap. I've heard is not unrealistic to gain with a good artificial surface, and then the shoes.
Yeah. So, Joe, what do you think of these super shoes now that have come out the last couple of years? These carbon plated shoes, and these men and women are just running unbelievable times with these things now.
Well, they're expensive.
Yes, they are.
They cost $300 from what I've
At
heard.
least. Yeah.
Yes.
A pair of shoes.
And you get like 200 miles out of them.
You run on them once.
One race. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, the
Yeah,
elites don't pay for
I
them.
could never have afforded them.
I remember
to,
Runner's World.
Pay $20 for a pair of shoes.
Well, Runner's World was known for years for their shoe survey. I loved reading it, and you really would use that as a tool. Then it got a little bit controversial. Now, Joe, you were an insider. Some people thought certain shoe companies that advertised with the publication we will not name would get a better rating because they were spending a ton of money. And you'd like to go, no. We had an independent tester, and it was, I can't remember the guy's name, but he was quite a scientist who would drop weights on the heels and he'd measure impact forces and all the flexibility.
Penn State.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so
I
you'd
don't
like to
remember
say,
his
well,
name
no,
either.
there was no hanky panky going on with this. If the shoe rated well, it was a good shoe. If it didn't rate well, it wasn't a good shoe. But they got rid of it then eventually. They didn't do the shoe ratings, or I think, or is there any history there that you can share?
Well, I would be willing to share anything, but there's no hanky panky went on as far as I knew.
Good.
And I would have been the first to know.
Yeah,
You're right.
Well, you'd like to think it's on the up and up, but you keep hearing. Yeah, that's just our culture.
It's that hearsay stuff that
Yeah.
you hear about, like the runners today. They run a fast time and they must be doped up, and I'm sure some of them are, but a lot of them aren't too, So
or the shoe company that didn't get a good rating would sour grapes. Well, that's because they advertised more for them. Their shoe got rated higher, and so, like Dick just said, it's probably rumor, and unfortunately, rumors carry a lot of weight. At Runner's World, I didn't get a chance to visit with Rich so much, but I hope I get to again someday. Some of the people you guys brought in, like Derek Clayton. Did you ever get to meet Derek Clayton?
He was next to God.
Yeah.
He was in second place there.
In his
for
mind?
a long time, for a couple of years.
Yeah.
And the boss, who hired Derek Clayton because he was Derek Clayton, because he held the world record at one time.
Sure.
So the name recognition, I'll buy it. Okay.
Yeah.
So did he do a lot of like promotional stuff for Runner's World, or did he write a column? I can't remember.
I don't remember much about his time there because most of his time there, I was working for Running Magazine,
Okay.
which was a Nike publication.
Right. Yes.
And that ties back to your question about the shoe issue. Nike didn't do well in the shoe ratings. In fact, Nike was downgraded severely.
Ah.
And Phil Knight, who you know,
Yep.
and Phil Knight is now the richest man in Oregon. His worth is in the billions with a B.
Oofta.
Yeah. But at the time that he was the head of Nike in the 70s, he came to visit just like Mike did.
Right.
Hi,
Came
I'm
to
here
the
to
door,
take
knocked
it.
on the door, and was turned away by a certain individual at the magazine.
Whoa.
And I talked to Phil Knight in the same office that Mike visited. Yes.
Wow.
Interesting.
And at that time, Nike was in trouble. It was about to sell to
Really?
Adidas, to various other companies, and Nike was not given a good rating in the shoe issues.
Okay.
And so they started their own magazine called Running,
Yep.
and that's why I moved to Eugene was to work for Running Magazine.
So that's what's got you to Eugene,
Yeah.
Joe.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay. But that only lasted, that magazine was only out for what, about 2, 3 years?
About 3 years. Yeah.
And then Nike decided just to pull the plug, not enough subscriptions or what?
Well, I could talk the whole time about the reason for Nike's foray in the magazine world, but basically they couldn't find advertisers. Nobody wanted to
Oh.
advertise in a magazine that was owned by Nike.
Okay.
So did they have kind of a bad name back then with other companies or what?
It was competition.
Sure.
Yeah. That nobody wanted to advertise in a magazine that was founded by Nike.
Interesting.
Well, so Phil Knight came close to selling. I'm sure as he looks back now, he's probably glad he didn't.
Yes, that's right.
Well, I just was on
There's a
Facebook.
certain
Yeah.
basketball player named Jordan, Michael
Right.
Jordan,
Yeah.
who
I
made
think.
Nike
Yeah.
famous.
Yeah. And Ely Nastasi. I remember the tennis player named Ely Nastasi. He was one of the
Right.
first professional athletes, and Nike came to him and said, "Look, we're our Nike tennis shoe." And he was so flamboyant, and the press, I think he loved the press. The press loved him. And that kind of was, it kind of started snowballing. Jordan obviously then came down the pipe.
And Bo
But even
Jackson, too.
Bo Jackson was
Right.
great
Yeah.
advertisement. Great. I love those commercials they did with Joe. Joe's. Then Lance Armstrong came along and Nike jumped into the cycling world, believe it or not.
Right.
I actually had Nike cycling shoes at one time. I still have a pair of Nike arm warmers. They have the Nike swoosh. Now, runners wear arm warmers too, I understand, but cyclists had them first. Okay. Because I wore them today. I didn't wear that particular pair. Anyway, they're kind of old, but they kind of caught I guess whatever, when Lance Armstrong came along, they caught that. Oh, we're going to get into the cycling game and used Lance and signed him to endorsement deals. There's a picture on Facebook today of Lance and Phil Knight. It's kind of funny you brought that up, Joe, arm in arm. And it's on Lance's post. And he says, "Good to reconnect with my old friend, Phil."
Oh,
And
wow.
yeah, and Phil's in his 80s. I think he was pre, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
I think he ran for Oregon
And
before
he's at least 85 now.
Yeah. And so, like you said, he's done fairly well for himself. But
Well,
where else?
I have a question. If I'm
sure.
allowed to ask questions, Mike,
No.
Yes.
Dick, tell us about your marathon background.
Oh, nobody wants to hear that stuff. Nobody
Well,
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 it's
Joe,
better than mine.
I ran my first marathon and I was 21 in 1977. I ran the Pavo Nurmi Marathon up in the little town of Hurley, Wisconsin. You're putting her in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, and I ran it and swore I'd never run another one. And thankfully, I ran another one 3 months later. And after that one, I swore I'd never run another one. And then thankfully, looking back, I probably picked up one of your books or something and read it on about this longer distances to run and start how to train for these things. And thankfully, it paid off.
And ended up
And
with a
Mike, what
208
about
marathon.
you?
Well, I had Jay Dirksen as my coach in college, and Jay was a marathoner, a 221 marathoner, and he trained us like marathoners. And I think we've all looked back now over the years and said that was probably, as a college athlete, age 18 to 22, training as we were training as a 220 marathoner. So I ran a 233 as an 18-year-old, my first attempt.
Wow.
And ran every 10K faster than the one before. So I paced it really. I negative split so I finished on a high. I was like, wow, 233, and I felt good. I went back to the same race the next year as a 19-year-old and ran 229 and won it. And that's that December I came to Runner's World, and you guys were working on the top 10. And in the age 16 to 19 age group in 1976, in 10th place was Mike Dunlap in 229.20.
Are you kidding? So Don,
I was
Joe,
10th.
I've known Mikey. He's been my best friend for 45 plus years, and and I'd never heard that story before.
I'm not one to blow my own horn, Dick, and so
nor am I.
No, and I was so proud of that, Joe, because you don't know what it's like as a high school kid to open up Runner's World and read about some of the best runners in the world and go, how are they able to do these things? And to go back to, and you guys used to do race results. I used to love to go to the race results because we didn't have
that was my favorite part.
There was no internet. Yes. There was no, track and field news didn't cover all the road races like maybe Runner's World would pick up on Springbank and all those kind of races and Falmouth. And so I would go and just scour. And I remember I ran some race that made 1979, the Black Hills Marathon. I ran like 220 and the results were in the Runner's World in the back. And I have those in a scrapbook somewhere. And so, I never ran a marathon, Joe. I raced marathons. What's that?
You ran 218.
218. When I ran my 229, I tied with my roommate, Randy Fisher. We both ran 229 that day. He was 820. I was 19. He was just a little older than me. And we came back and told Jay Dirksen, hey, Jay. And he goes, how'd you guys do? And we ran 229 and 20, and we won the race. He looked us both in the eyes, and I get chills, and he goes, you're both going to break 220 someday. Now, I just got goosebumps. And I don't know if I ever told Dick this story, because I would have said to him, there's no, I almost said a bad word there, freaking way, because 9 minutes. And you guys know when you run a marathon, why didn't you run 9 minutes faster? My gosh, I'd have to jump in a car to go 9 minutes faster. But, at that time, I give Jay a lot of credit because he put that thought, and words are powerful. And Joe, that's why I appreciate you as a writer. And, the pen is mightier than the sword. You maybe have heard that one before. But when somebody tells you something like that, you will break 220 someday and means it. And it's not a flippant, throwaway. It takes you back and you never forget it. You'll always remember that. And so that's why I think people like you, Joe, that can put into words what common people feel. We might have thoughts and wonderments. You've done the time and taken the effort to do the research and to hone your craft. And before we came on the air, I was asking Joe about why writing, Joe? Why did you write as a young kid? Did you journal or what?
Yeah, tell us about that quickly, Joe. We're getting close on time here, but how did you ever get started writing?
Well, my father was a writer.
Oh.
And my mother was a writer. So I had no choice.
Came with the territory. But were you good at it from the start? I mean, is it like running?
I probably the person who had most to do with my writing skill, so to speak, was Fred Wilt. He said, "Write
Wow.
about your running," and you can see the books in the bookcases.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
From 1959 on, I wrote every day
Wow.
So
until
like running,
2019.
That's
And
amazing. So,
then
Joe,
then I
go
have
ahead.
2020 to 23. There's nothing in there.
Well,
Yeah.
Well,
you've
And
got some in the bank.
2024, there's something every day.
wow.
That's
So,
that's
Joe,
amazing.
when you were writing all your books, did you, and you're working on a particular book, did you ever get what they call that writer's block, where sometimes you would just have to set it aside for a few days and kind of let your mind clear? Or how did that ever affect you at all?
Yes and no. Yes,
Yeah.
every day.
Ah,
And I wrote anyway.
Wow.
it's kind of
And
like
some
getting
of
up
it
in the
was
Amazing.
morning when I
not
don't
worth
feel like
reading.
running, but you get. I think you've said
Yes.
this. What was it, George Sheehan or you? Give yourself the chance. Get out of bed, put your stuff on, go out the door. And I think it was you or Joe, or maybe it was George, said within a mile, if you're not feeling better, you don't have it, turn around, walk home. And he goes, 99% of the time, you're not going to do. You're going to keep going.
Right.
So it's just getting
Yeah.
started. It's taking that first step.
So
Hmm.
let me close by asking Dick, did anybody say you ever were going to run 208?
No, no, Joe, I think I think that was probably.
Oh,
I mean, I never even dreamed about even breaking 220 until quite a bit later, and I don't think if
no,
if
wait a
if
minute.
there
Wait,
was a
time out, time out. Coach Folkrod, what did Coach Folkrod tell you one day? Put his arm
so
around
my
you and
college coach at
yes.
the University of Minnesota Waseca, one day after all the other guys had gone in from cross country practice, and Coach Folkrod was timing me doing extra 400s along the edge of a cornfield, and we got done, and him and I are walking back into the men's locker room, and Coach Folkrod put his arm around my shoulder and he says, Dick, I really believe you can become as good of a runner as you want to be. And Joel, I never ever forgot that. And there were many times I thought about throwing the towel in. And so like we've said this many times, you never know. When you say something to somebody, whether it be positive or negative, you never know how it's going to affect you or that person at the moment, tomorrow, next week, next month, or years down the road. And that's something that stuck to me even to this day with other things in my life. When I felt like maybe throwing in the towel, I thought about what Coach Folkrod had said to me. So, yeah.
That's
Pretty
good
neat.
stuff.
Well, Joe, listen, we cannot thank you enough for being on with us. Our time went by so gosh dang quick.
All right.
It is so good to see you, to talk to you, to see that Joe Henderson smile on his face, even through all the things
All
you've been
right.
through. And we want to thank everybody for listening. And if you have any questions for us or the comments about the show, you can contact us directly at our website at beardsanddunpod.com or leave us a comment on our Facebook, Instagram, or X, all at Beards and Dun Pod. Mikey,
Yep.
take it away.
Okay, and we'll be on YouTube, and so we'd love to have you go look at that, subscribe, whatever. And I'm just going to finish with this. If you're a runner or have been a runner, you owe it to yourself. Go to a computer and put in Joe Henderson, author. There's several Joe Hendersons out there. That's why there's a great jazz musician named Joe Henderson. But Joe Henderson, author, and you really owe it to yourself, to read some of Joe's works. If you have Kindle,
And even if you're thinking about becoming a runner and don't know anything about it,
and if you
pick
don't know
up some of Joe's books, read them.
And if you don't know who George Sheehan, we kept talking about George Sheehan a lot. If you're not sure about George Sheehan, I think Did I Win, which is George's story. I think that would be as good as any place to start. But Joe, you're kind of a legend, and I'm honored to have you as a friend. And I hope our paths cross again. We talked about a reunion this fall, and we're kind of announcing this to the world. We're going to get together at the Blue Ox Marathon in Bemidji, Minnesota, October 12th. And we've invited all the former campers that ever came to Dick's Running Camps, anybody listening to this podcast, all of our guests that have been on the podcast, if you can make your way to Bemidji, Minnesota, the weekend of October 11th, 12th, and 13th, we're going to have some social get-togethers at Dick and Jill, their beautiful bed and breakfast. They have a huge yard with a great fire pit. And Joe, I know you're limited, but if you can figure out a way, we might just have to go get him.
I was going to say, we'll get him.
We'll just kidnap you, Joe, and you will be able
Then
to.
Rich
But thank
can
you,
get
Joe.
me.
I sure appreciate you. And Dick,
Exactly.
Thank you.
Yes.
Joe, have a great day, buddy.
Yeah,
Mike,
Joe, take
Dick,
care,
thank
pal.
You,
All
You
right.
bet. Love you, guy. Take care, buddy.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.